Is it true that women like a guy with a six-pack and lots of money, or do they prefer a dad bod and to be the breadwinner? You hear a lot of conflicting views ranging from liberal feminists all the way to conservative business people. In this video, we're going to be looking at what the science and psychological research says about these points. One such study involving 10,047 participants in 37 different cultures across all continents in the world gives some deep insight into what women truly value and what women value more than what men do in a partner. I just want to make clear that the goal of this video isn't to demonize the preferences of women in a partner, but rather we're going to be looking at things from an evolutionary perspective, primarily within the general domain of mate value. Mate value, in case you didn't know, is the collection and combination of traits that someone possesses that makes them, in theory and on paper, a good partner. Mate value is the thing that really applies in the early and short-term stages of dating because in reality, it's all you have to go on. Once you get to know someone in more detail, you can figure out the specific intricacies of that person, the specific things that make them who they are, and then this can solidify your feelings towards them. But at the start of dating, you don't really know anything about that person. So whether you want to invest your time or energy will heavily depend on the kinds of impressions you get early on, and these types of things is usually related to mate value. The reason why these preferences exist is because throughout human history, women in terms of sexual selection who prioritize these particular traits in a partner did better to increase their chances of survival both in themselves and in their children. The extent to which these ideals apply to individual women will vary because of their genetics and their emotional and psychological development. So jumping in at number one, we're going to be looking at financial prospects, and let's see to what extent this stereotype actually holds true. So using a scale of importance, a study in 1939 showed that women valued good financial prospects in a partner as important, whereas men valued it merely as desirable but not important. Women in 1939 valued this trait about twice as highly as men did, and this finding was replicated both in 1956 and 1967. Now you might be thinking that this particular finding isn't that surprising, given that women were very financially dependent on their male partners and husbands back in the 1930s, 40s, 50s and 60s. But since then there's been the sexual revolution where women have become a lot more independent, a lot less constrained by the resources of their partner, and a lot more in control of their own lives, both in terms of their career and in terms of things such as contraception. But what's really interesting is that many studies have been done over the decades since the sexual revolution, and this particular result and preference still holds true. A study in American colleges was done, and they asked both men and women what is the minimum acceptable percentile that they would find in a partner in terms of several characteristics. When it came to earning capacity, women said the 70th percentile, whereas men said the 40th percentile. And what this translates to is the minimum earnings that a male has to have in order to be acceptable to that particular woman is in the top 30% of all men. As I mentioned at the start of this video, a study involving over 10,000 people across 37 different cultures was completed, and this particular finding that women value financial resources more than men did was verified and found to be true in every single one of those 37 different cultures. So now that we know this particular preference exists, it might be interesting to look at why it exists, especially given in modern times women are less constrained by the resources and financial situation of their partner. Well, the answer lies in evolutionary biology and psychology, and back in the day in caveman times, women who became pregnant were heavily dependent on the resources and ability to be able to provide for them by their male partners. Not only was a man's ability to hunt and provide a lot more important back then than it is today, but also to negate the effects of pregnancy in becoming less autonomous, more reliant on others, and the increased demands in order to be able to facilitate that pregnancy, women gravitated towards men who had increased resources or the increased capacity to provide those resources. So now let's move on to the next trait, which is social status. In a study of 5,000 college students, women rated status, prestige, rank, position, and many other similar terms as important far more than men did. Women also judged the likelihood of success in their career and the possession of a promising position as highly desirable in a spouse. Interestingly, women value education because they are strong signals for these things, and they tend to value them a lot more in developed countries than developing countries. The next one is age, and when asked whether they prefer their partner to be older or younger than them, in every single one of these countries and cultures, women preferred men who were older and men preferred women who were younger. In all 37 cultures, women on average prefer men who are 3.42 years older than they are. The evolutionary reason for this is because cross-culturally and trans-historically, men as they get older tend to accumulate more status, more resources, more wealth, and their ability to obtain these things tends to go up as well. In addition, as men age, they typically become more conscientious, more mature, more wise, and less neurotic. You may have noticed that the 3 traits that I've covered so far all either relate to a man's level of resources or his ability to obtain resources, and the same is true for the next one. Ambition and industriousness are highly desirable traits by women because they are some of the best predictors of past and future projected income and promotions. It turns out that American women far more often than men desire mates who enjoy their work. In addition, surveys and polls have shown that women regard men who lack ambition as highly undesirable, whereas men view the same trait of a lack of ambition as neither desirable nor undesirable in a partner. The next traits are dependability and emotional stability, and these are the second and third most highly valued characteristics in a partner by both sexes. An interesting finding is that while emotional stability might be marginally behind dependability overall, there's actually a larger sexual asymmetry in that women value this particular trait more than men do. So the evolutionary reason for dependability is that it encompasses both trust and selflessness, and there's no point having a wealthy or high status partner if they're not willing to actually share those resources and take care of you when you need it. Emotional stability is for similar reasons, in that if you're emotionally stable, you're less likely to make rash decisions, which will lead to you either losing your resources or get you into trouble, which could end up threatening the safety of your particular family. The next trait is intelligence, and there's less sexual asymmetry here in that both men and women do value this trait, but the big difference is that men value it more in long-term partners, but don't care about it as much if they're only looking for something short-term. Women value this trait in general because it signals your problem-solving ability and potentially even your parental skills. Not only is it useful to have someone who has the ability to solve the various problems that you come across, but also intelligence increases your earning potential and even your status in the long term. There's another theory in the evolutionary psychology world called the sexy son hypothesis, and this states that certain traits might be desirable purely because they're hard to obtain. In the same way that peahens are drawn to peacocks with large flamboyant feathers, even though in theory it should be a disadvantage and decreases your ability to survive, but because a male is signaling to a female that they have the ability to carry these particular feathers and these luxuries and still survive, is an overall strong signal of evolutionary or genetic strength. Because it's more difficult to be intelligent and the associated genetics must be more complicated, women might view intelligence as a signal or marker for good genetic quality. This leads on to the next trait or the next collection of traits, which are strength and physicality. The sexy son hypothesis might hold true here too, but also there's another additional and more obvious benefit to having someone who is stronger and higher levels of physical stature and physicality. The first point is that being strong has traditionally increased your ability to gather resources, both from hunting and your overall ability to carry things back. The other benefit to being strong is in terms of intrasexual competition, so the bigger and stronger you are, the easier it will be to command respect and to intimidate others so that they don't end up going for the same types of mates that you are. The next trait that is highly desirable, and this applies to both men and women, is having a partner who is loving. Showing love towards your partner is a marker and signal that you're committed to them and that there's trust and loyalty in the long term. This is why people put such high emphasis on love, because it doesn't make sense to invest both emotionally, physically, and financially in your partner if they don't reciprocate. And the last one is kindness, and this is for similar reasons that I mentioned earlier, in that if you're not kind, you're less likely to provide those resources despite the fact that you may already have them. Kindness is a sign of generosity and your willingness to dispense with what you already have for someone else that you care about. So from what we've covered so far, if you combine all the traits together, you end up with a guy who is wealthy, high status, slightly older, intelligent, dependable, emotionally stable, loving, kind, and strong. Essentially, this forms the male archetype, or at the very least it gets pretty close to what most women would view as the perfect guy. As we all know, nobody's perfect, so having someone with all of these traits in abundance is highly unlikely, or maybe even borderline impossible. So what I want to do instead, and you may have noticed that in some of the titles of the traits that I've covered, I've either labeled them as alpha or beta traits. This is because, roughly speaking, women view men on the spectrum of alpha to beta. So whatever traits you tend to be more dominant in, women tend to test you and check for the opposite traits, so they know they're getting an overall good deal. Over the course of a relationship, women will continually test your value, and typically this is done both subconsciously and in subtle ways. So if she views you as an alpha, she has no question over those particular alpha traits, so instead she wants to make sure that you have the other particular traits, which are the beta ones, in your locker. Women who are drawn to or are in relationships with alpha males tend to try certain tests, usually involving affection and love, in that they're trying to guarantee and test for your overall loving and beta nurturing qualities. So this may happen when she's in an emotional or distressed state. She may end up testing you and checking with you whether you love her, or saying things such as you don't listen, or you don't pay attention, or you don't care about her feelings. This is a way to prod and check if you have those other nurturing qualities. Women who are in relationships with guys on the beta side of the spectrum don't have these particular doubts, because when she's feeling distressed or upset, they tend to instinctively gravitate towards her to make her feel better. But then they lack some of the other qualities, or at least they could lack them, which is why she tests for them. Some of these tests could involve neediness, because alpha males tend to be less needy, or it could involve some kind of situation around conflict, and she wants to see how you handle that. Beta males tend to be more likely to avoid conflict or run away in the face of it, whereas alpha males tend to be a bit more dominant and not back down and stand up and be more assertive. Overall, the higher the mate value that this particular woman has, the more she's going to be concerned with whether she's getting a good deal. And in order to be able to check this, she runs through a series of tests, which are usually subconscious. So the goal of this particular point isn't to tell you to pretend to be anything that you're not, but rather to make you aware of some of the main things that women tend to value, so either that you can aspire towards them, or at least you'll be aware of the signals that she may give off when she doesn't feel like she's getting those particular things. Essentially, women ideally want a well-rounded guy. So if you're particularly lacking in some of these particular areas, it gives you something to point towards that you can maybe develop, whether that's confidence or assertiveness, or some kind of things around compassion, nurture, and your ability to listen to what she's feeling. So I hope you found this video useful. If you did, then feel free to subscribe, like, leave a comment down below. Otherwise, I'll see you in the next video.